Peace and good and greetings once again from the Shrine of St. Anthony, and we're here once again to continue our reflections on the readings that we'll be experiencing on Sunday at Mass. And this week we are up to the 30th Sunday in Ordinary Time already. Once again we'll focus on the Gospel text. And I was thinking about this week. You might find it helpful actually to follow along. Some people find that actually helpful. So this week it's Luke chapter 18, 9 to 14, verses 9 to 14. And in fact, this is a continuation of the story we heard last week, right? It's a continuation of that story. And again, the focus of this unit is prayer. Right? It's ultimately about prayer. Even though it doesn't seem like that, that's what it's about, okay? So again, Luke 18, 9 to 14. So let's listen to the text, and then we'll have some words to say about that. Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. "O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I pay tithes on my whole income." But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. There's a really interesting rhetorical technique, you might say, in this parable, right? So you hear this parable and you're thinking about it, right? And what's your reaction? Without thinking about it too much, right? What's your reaction to the story? Now, there is a temptation to think to yourself, that lousy Pharisee, what a rotten guy he is. Now, if you make that move, in fact, if that's how you read the text, you have fallen into an incredible trap, right? Because now you, me, whoever, is the Pharisee in the story. And maybe that's the whole point. Haven't we all been there before, right? Haven't we all behaved? Maybe we still behave at times like the Pharisee in the story. Indeed, does not the culture that we find ourselves in? The Pharisee is the poster boy for the world today, right? I'm right, you're wrong, you're bad. Is that not the world we live in today? Us and thems? Us is good, them is bad? This is a great parable because it's incredibly effective, as we've seen already, right? We haven't even talked about it yet. And again, as we said at the beginning, this section that we read today is part of a larger literary unit, and what we heard last week. And again, the whole thing is about prayer, which, as we talked about last week, what is prayer? Prayer is our relationship to God. Prayer is our relationship to God. Prayer is faith in action. And again, it's interesting how these pieces are building on one another, right? So the overall theme of this rather lengthy section we've been reading for weeks now, it's about faith. It's about faith. This little unit we've been considering last week and today is about faith in action, which is prayer, our relationship with God. So, what do we have in the story? Let's look at the story very carefully, as we always do. What do we have? Two men praying. But how do they pray? We're going to focus on, you might say, their perspectives, their orientations, perhaps, is another way to talk about it. Indeed, we should pay very careful, because the text does, right? There's all these little details in the text. There's no throwaways in Scripture. Anything that's there is there for a reason, right? We can often fall into that trap too, right? Thinking, oh, here's some fluff, they just stuck it in to make it a little longer or to make some pious point. No. Everything's there for a reason. There's no throwaways in Scripture. So we're going to focus on perspective, orientation, and very specifically on visual sight lines. Who's looking where, right? Because the physical vision in the story says a lot about the spiritual vision in the story. And of course, that's what we're interested in, right? So, first we have the account of the Pharisee. All right. So again, this idea of looking at perspective also is kind of broadly looking at the communications that are going on. Now, who is he talking to? Himself. Isn't that interesting? Right? The Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. That's a little dig. Right? And as we'll see, there's great meaning there, okay? Who is he looking at? The tax collector. Oh, God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, all those lousy people out there, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. You can't say that without looking at him, right? Who's he got his eye on? His eyes are not on God. They're not even on himself. That's important. They're on the tax collector, right? Who is he praying to? He's praying to himself. Who is his God? Who is his God? Simple. It's his own miserable, self-righteous, pious self. Right? That has become his God. We can bring this text again to the broader culture, right? The secular culture. But now let's bring this into our religious culture, you might say. Don't we all know miserable, self-righteous, pious people? Right? Self-righteous. Right? They have become their own God. Right? They have become the arbiter of right and wrong, good and evil. On their own. Who is the Pharisee judging? That's easy too. The greedy, the dishonest, the adulterous. And who is he talking about here? That guy over there, the tax collector. Now, indeed, tax collectors in this world tended to be crooks. Just the nature of the business. And maybe our tax collector, indeed, maybe he is greedy. Maybe he is dishonest. Maybe he is adulterous. Could be. It's not the point of the story, though, is it? Right? Who is the Pharisee judging? The tax collector, who now is a metaphor for all those horrible things. Now, that list of things is quite interesting. Those who are greedy, those who are dishonest, those who are adulterous. Where did we hear that recently? It's been a few weeks. Remember the story of the rich man and Lazarus. And remember, we looked at the bigger passage. Right? And what did we find there? It was Jesus, again, being taunted by the Pharisees, right? And Jesus responding and kind of throwing it back at him. And he's pointing out, right, how they are in and of themselves sinful, right? Because remember what it said in that text. It talks about those who are greedy, dishonest, and adulterous as an abomination. And indeed, the Pharisee ticks the box. Remember, the Pharisees were money grubbers. They were greedy. They were an abomination in the eyes of God, right? So what is the Pharisee doing? He's judging, justifying himself. Big mistake, right? Because that's not our job. It's not our place to judge or justify ourselves. We are what we are. We are who we are. It's not for our place to judge, even ourselves. Paul says that in his writings, right? So what has become his justifying himself? What has become his judging himself? It's become his possession that he holds on to, right? This is his and not his, right? He has become his own God. He's become an idolater, right? He's praying to himself, right? And he gives us all this, and of course he is justifying himself, right? I fast twice a week. I pay tithes on my whole income, right? Given what we know about the religious culture of that time, those were excessive things. Those were beyond the expectation of your average person, right? So he's saying, I'm better than the rest of y'all. He's become his own God. And in fact, he's praying, but he's talking to himself. Now, let's go to the tax collector. This is easier, right? Who was the tax collector talking to? He's talking to God. The tax collector would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "Oh God." Well, actually, "Oh God," right? "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." The perfect act of contrition. Oh God, he's talking to God. Be merciful to me. He's begging, he's pleading. And he's being honest. Be merciful to me, a sinner. Right? He's talking to God, but he's looking literally at himself. Right? That's important, right? He's self-reflective. Who's the Pharisee looking at? That rotten guy over there. Who is the tax collector looking at? The rotten guy in here. Right? Who is he praying to? He's praying to God. Who is he judged and justified by? Not himself. God. He's literally throwing himself at the mercy of the court. Right? He's throwing himself at the mercy of God's justice. And therefore, God is God for him. And his relationship with God is not a possession, it's a gift, which he begs for. He begs for that gift of mercy, right? And he's honest with himself. It's a powerful story, and one that clearly our secular world, but indeed, perhaps even more so, our religious world, our Catholic religious world needs to hear, right? As we increasingly become us and them, right? Hopefully that prayer of the tax collector becomes our own. And again, it is the perfect act of contrition. Oh God, who am I talking to? Who is God? Not me. I beg, be merciful to me, a sinner. All right, thanks for joining us again this week. And again, thank you for your support and all that you do to help us to continue this ministry and all these ministries that we do here at the Shrine of St. Anthony and through our Companions of St. Anthony outreach as well. We're just a little commercial, but when this goes, by the time you see this, we'll have completed our second talk in our series of experiences of Christian spirituality. Last month we looked at relics. This month we're looking at images. Perhaps by the time you see this, that talk will be actually online and available to whoever wants to watch it on YouTube and such. So keep an eye out for that. And there'll be a third talk this month for various reasons that will probably be transcribed for broadcast at a later date. It probably won't be live this month, but we will have content available, a talk this month in November. Not this month, next month. So there will be a talk in November, and so keep an eye out for. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. So keep looking, and hopefully you'll join us for that one as well. So, again, we're grateful for all of you. You are all our companions together with us of St. Anthony. We thank you for your support, material and spiritual and prayers and all that you do to help us, and know that you're remembered each evening in our prayers here at the Friary. So until next time, peace and good.